Richie Allen.
Now, Gordon is formerly of the RAF. He was in the RAF for 12 years until 1982. He then worked in South Africa for a while. He's an engineer, is Gordon. And while he was there back in the early 2000s, his partner at the time, Val, put savings in a capital venture scheme, around about $50,000 US. And to cut a long story short, the money went missing. There was a protracted search to find out what happened to it, and that's how he then got into doing what it is that he does now. He's in Derby, so let's welcome Gordon Bowden to the show. Gordon, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the call. How are you?
I'm fine, Richie. How can you hear me? Loud and clear?
Loud and clear. It's almost like you're sitting next to me, Gordon, which is no bad thing. So I think I kind of categorised that, not categorised it, but kind of qualified that rightly, didn't I? It was in Africa, South Africa, in the early part of 2001, that Val put some money in a 3-month investment, which a lot of people were doing, for the future of the children. And if you want to pick up the story from there, Gordon, the money went missing.
Yeah, sure, Richie. Poor Val was persuaded by her long-time family investment broker to invest in a capital venture scam. Of investment.
Well, it was a scam at the time. You can say a scam if you want.
Unbeknown to everybody, it was just an investment. And it was because it was a short-term investment. I had no idea what was happening. It was nothing to do with me. I just got approached about 2 months after the investment should have been paid out. And then I took her to Standard Bank to meet with the investment specialist. And we went through the paperwork, which she had shown me about 2 hours previous. And after 10 minutes, I'd looked at it. The only thing that she had recourse to investigate with was a cell phone number. That was the only contact details she had. No physical addresses, just a mobile phone number, which I found out was a sat phone number, which then led me to some dodgy places, checking the sat phone registration numbers for that particular person. Yeah, so it was just an investment, basic investment, capital venture investment, to which Val and another person in East London invested in. And in total, it was $102,000 US. That in itself is not a lot in terms of financial fraud. However, later on, I think it was about 4 or 5 months later, after I started my own investigations, that I found out there were people like the Blue Bulls rugby team were involved, a lot of them, and small businesses that went bankrupt. So all in all, I think there were about 800 victims of the same fraud.
And it was into the hundreds of millions, wasn't it, in terms of the money that was missing, as you said.
When I spoke to a policeman, he said they reckon it was at least 130 million, and that was just South Africa alone. So what it was internationally, I had no idea. All I had to work with was the money trail of conducted by 2 forensic attorneys at law, who then did the money trail to Austria and London, where they traced the specific suspects and all their profiling, where they moved the money, what accounts, who was there cashing it in, and the accounts in the Channel Islands where it was used, and the companies involved in London.
Just a couple of quick questions, Gordon, on that. Because I'm very, 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 very ignorant of these sorts of things, because I've never really had any money. And because I've never really had any money, I've never been able to make any investments. I'm not putting a kind of a poor mouse on myself. I'm not, but I've never had the sort of money where I could make investments. Banks recommend these things, don't they? And in Val's case, did the bank recommend it? And if
no.
They didn't. All right. Okay.
No. It wasn't.
They facilitated it, but they didn't recommend it. Okay.
Ever since they'd been in South Africa, they'd been there for 20 odd years. They relied upon their family insurance broker, and he'd come to hear of a scheme from 2 of his previous employees who were down in Cape Town, and they'd said that they were interested in this capital venture thing, and they promoted it to their previous employer, who then issued it out to all his clients. But there were other factors that related to that. And as I always say, when you want to find out how it starts, you've got to go back to square one, which is where I started my investigations. And I found out that the people involved in the initial roadshow to promote this was a gentleman called Nico Sheffer. And if anybody types into the internet and does a search on this scumbucket, he's a convicted bank robber, fake mining company owner, and he deals with a lot of the intelligence services throughout the world. And those are the people who are the real scumbags in our intelligence
Now,
services.
this is where it gets really interesting, of course. So,
Yes.
so this guy then, how connected was this guy to various intelligence agencies? In what way was he connected to them? Was he a guy who gave them information? Did he do jobs for them? What sort of stuff was he doing?
What, Nico Sheffer?
Yeah, this guy, yeah.
Nico Sheffer is a Colombian from Israel as well. He's got a dual passport. And what he was doing was he was setting up fake mining companies, including diamond mining companies and gold, and then selling them by way of his cohorts in America called Greater Ministries, and with salted diamond mines.
And was it their job then to lure unsuspecting people into making investments in these companies, right?
Yes, so okay. Nico Sheffer and his gang would then go on roadshows throughout the world and then bring in gullible, naive people on the pretext that they could make great profits with their investments. He actually conned a whole congregation in America called Greater Ministries. They were raided by the FBI. They arrested all the people involved with that. Some priest that was running Greater Ministries USA, but Nico Sheffer was running Greater Ministries South Africa, and that's where this came in, this particular fraud. And that's what I say is you got to go back to the very basics and the beginning, and then do a profile of all the people.
Now tell us, Gordon, the money then, the massive amounts of money that guys like Sheffer were basically stealing from people, guys with very shady connections with the security services like him. What were they doing with the money? Surely they weren't just buying Bentleys and big houses. What was this really all about? Where was the money going?
Well, I found out in 2002. We owned a restaurant in a place called East London, and it was during this time that the two attorneys at law were conducting the civil recovery attempt. And in 2002, what happened was when they realized there were so many other investors, it then became a criminal case because of when there's more than one person connected and connected to the same fraud, it then becomes a criminal issue. So the police were brought in, and we brought in the specialist police, which were the Scorpions. They were the biggest anti-corruption crime police in South Africa at that time. So that was 2002. And then all of a sudden, I had a gentleman standing outside the restaurant with a brown A4 size folder in his hand. And I took it off him. He said, "You Gordon Bowden?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, I'll catch you later. And he just gave it to me, and I took it inside the restaurant. And I looked, and there was about a 30-page file inside. And on the top of it was said, "Secret, South African," what was it called? Now I'm just trying to think of the name of the file. Excuse me a minute. It was South African Secret Disruption. And what it was a leaked intelligence dossier where obviously somebody knew I was recovering documents, and they were ex-intelligence service, and they dropped this file off because the very people who signed the fraud documents were ex-South African military intelligence. And that's what brought me into understanding how dangerous we were getting involved with some of the people, including Nico Sheffer. And the gentleman concerned, when I looked at the signatures and names on the fraud documents to which my partner lost her life savings, was a guy called Hannes Venter. And I did a quick search with a mate of mine who was ex-Special Forces in South Africa, and he found out that this guy was a colonel in the military intelligence services.
Wow.
And then the guy that initiated the fraud, his name was Chris Dutoy. But when I did what they call an ITC search, which is the personal history and employment history of somebody using an ID number, I found out he was Christoffel Petrus Dutoy, who was the senior High Commission diplomatic intelligence officer. And so that led me to understand this was just not a normal fraud.
At any time, Gordon, did you think, I'm in over my head here now, I better just get away from this? You did?
You what?
No, I just asked you, at any time, did you decide, I'm in over my head here?
No. I've been in some dangerous places in my life. I've been shot at a few times. No, I don't take kindly to threats, and we were threatened. So at that time, we weren't. It wasn't until I started recovering some documents, and I was asked to go down to the Scorpions main office, which is on Fleet Street in East London, when all of a sudden, as the case progressed, I was called down there to go and speak to the deputy commander of the offices of the Scorpions. And when I got there, he said, "Are you Bowden?" And I said, "Well, I'm Gordon Bowden. You can call me Bowden if you want." And he unclipped his sidearm and pulled out his 9mm and stuck it in my face. I'm not lying. And he said, the intelligence services have been down and they've collected all the files, and now you are to go forth with jerky movements.
Wow.
And so, as I said, I didn't want to panic anybody. I've been in far more dangerous situations in my life. And then I started to do my real in-depth digging. I then saw a file, which was...
Gordon, do you want to just pause for a second? Because
sure.
There's loads of questions coming in. We're going out all over the place. We're going out all over Europe, here in England. Around the world on davidicke.com and everything. There's loads of questions coming in. If you're just joining the programme, it's 26 minutes past the hour. Gordon Bowden is on the line to me. Gordon's a former RAF engineer. He was discharged from his service with honours and lived in South Africa for some time. His partner was defrauded out of a large amount of money. He began digging and began unearthing some incredible information. Thanks for your questions, and I'm going to get to some of them now. Brian Jones... probably not the Brian Jones, but Brian Jones, he's emailed me a couple of times, wants to know, and you're going to get around to this anyway, but he's asking early, are these frauds being committed to basically fund the security services? Is that what they're doing? Does it go as far as that, he's asking?
Okay, this is where I was going to go with that
question.
Of
course,
yes, I recovered a file which was shown to me, which said that the people involved, Nico Sheffer was one of the instigators of this fraud, was wining and dining Sir Mark Thatcher and Margaret Thatcher in the Carlton Hotel in Johannesburg.
Mark, who should be in jail for years, but isn't.
Well, exactly.
And so... the coup orchestrator himself. Go on.
Yeah, and so what that said to me as an ex-serviceman is that everything that I'd ever believed in as a matter of trust and integrity for those people that I put a uniform on for, the government that would be able to issue orders for us to go to war, were actually being wined and dined by the people who stole her money and that of 800 other victims. Now, I later found out that those with Nico Sheffer at that time were members of Sandline International, the old Executive Outcomes bunch, which are all XAS mercenaries. Now, as you probably know, and is well recorded by the media, was Mark Thatcher was arrested in South Africa for being part of the funding operations for the Equatorial Guinea coup, which involved Sir Mark Thatcher and Simon Mann. And so I have to believe that a lot of the money which was conduited to London, and some of it must have gone back, which would have funded that sort of operation of Black Ops, because the business people that orchestrated that were actually operating out of London, not, as I said, I often repeat it, Burkina Faso and Nigeria. They were operated out of the city of London. And so it meant that there was complicity within government agencies who had knowledge of this, and I include Jack Straw, who knew well in advance of that operation because it's reported in the press. And he never said a word. That's a sovereign territory.
There are so many questions, Gordon.
Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in with a few of them. Gary says, does Gordon think that the intelligence services are just the thug wing of the Rothschild-controlled banking cartel? It's a genuine question from Gary on Twitter. What do you think?
Well, I'd like to keep that opinion to myself, Richie, because there are things in the pipeline at the moment with a sort of communication I've had with the BBC.
Which I want to talk about in a few minutes, because I was shown a video of you at the BBC in London handing over information that you want the BBC to investigate and to report on.
Yes.
I know you're not stupid just from talking to you over the last 15 to 20 minutes. There's a bit of irony there. We don't expect for a minute that the apologist for the establishment, BBC, is really going to investigate that stuff, so we don't.
Well, I believe.
Or do you hope?
We have a BBC TV license. They are a public listed company, and the directors of which are accountable to the public, for which they get their salary. And part of my experience in being able to dismantle quite complex machinery like gas turbine engines, aircraft hydraulic systems, to dismantle a boiler room for me was quite simple when I knew the common modus operandi of how you can set up fake companies and then dismantle each one. And that's what I did. Once I identified the major boiler room to which my partner's fraud was conducted out of, and by that I mean that the two companies that were registered as involved in this fraud were registered out of first a subsidiary satellite boiler room, which was Smallfield Cody & Co. And then later on, when we got back to the United Kingdom after threats in October 2005, what I did was the full dismantlement. Because I wasn't that computer savvy in South Africa, what I did was I waited till we got back and we were safe within the confines of the United Kingdom, if you can ever be safe here. Yeah. And then I started the full dismantlement of Smallfield Cody & Co. in London at 5 Harley Street. And what I found, every company that they were the administrators for emanated out of 788, 790 Finchley Road, and 2 flats guised as Winnington House, 2 Woodbury Grove, North Finchley. And so what I did was I structured the boiler room network, and I worked out from that boiler room.
Gordon, do you want to explain boiler room as a term to our listeners who have heard it a couple of times? They might be wondering, what does it mean, boiler room? What's the phrase mean?
Well, as we often see in fraud cases where the police have smashed these boiler rooms emanating from Spain or Gibraltar or Burkina Faso, it doesn't matter where they go. What happens is that you have a specific address to which there are many shell companies operating out of that address, or people promoting fake share certificates for various nefarious frauds and scams. And that's a boiler room. Now, to identify the physical address, what I uncovered was, I followed it back to the boiler room who instigated the 2 fake companies, and that was 5 different variations of the administrators, and they were Centrum Secretaries Limited, Centrum Nominees, Company Directors Limited, and Temple Secretaries Limited, and they all operated with the same common directors, but not just from that address, 788, 790 Finchley Road. They also operated out of Winnington House, 2 Woodbury Grove, and they also were then restructured from places like 1033A Finchley Road, 923 Finchley Road, 665, 420 Finchley Road, 108 to 110 Finchley Road. What they did was they could structure companies and move them and facilitate the movement of specific small shell companies to multiple addresses in Finchley Road. And yes, paperwork is a very boring subject. But once you identify the significance of multi-million pound crime, it becomes very interesting to dismantle it as an engineer. Do you understand?
Yeah. If this is true, Gordon, all of this,
It's
and
true.
listen, I'm not doubting it is. I'm just saying if it is, there'll be people listening who might be a bit skeptical about it, of course. But like being objective for a minute, if it is true,
Yes.
it's massive. I mean, it's an absolutely massive story. I spoke to you earlier on today, and I talked about knowledge of this in the corridors of power, and you were pretty certain that and I've got a question for you about David Cameron. It's been sent in by Simon. I'll give you that in a second. But you're pretty certain that this is going on with the blessing of those that, occupy the corridors of power in this country.
100%. 100%. I've got their names and how they're involved. I've got the companies that they're non-executive directors of. So I say that with full 100% certainty that I have been thanked by Swiss and French investigators. I think I mentioned it to you before, where the documentation which I published on the internet was seen by Swiss French investigators who contacted me and asked me for my sort of work in uncovering boiler rooms. And that resulted in Miss Anne Laveron of Arriva Nuclear France and her husband, Oliver Frick, and a gentleman called Sir Samuel Essen Jonah. And what happened there was I'd uncovered, by way of fake oil, gas, and mining companies, a company structured in Namibia called Uramin Inc., who purchased a care and maintenance mine in Namibia, a uranium mine, which fortunately I had a chance to have knowledge of because of my mining experience. And I'd been to Namibia. And that mine was purchased by the directors of Uramin Inc. for $100,000, and then 6 months later sold to Arriva Nuclear Fuels for $2.5 billion. It's
right. That's incredible, isn't it?
It's a care and maintenance mine. However, very few people would understand, by doing the forensic research and document recovery, that Miss Anne Laveron and Sir Samuel Essen Jonah were board directors of Vodafone.
And that's just got to be. And if any, if that's true, and look, I've done research this afternoon. I know it to be true. I've got to say but I know it is true. I'm not on television with you now, so I can't flash these things up on the screen for people to see. But what that's an example of is that's bold, naked money laundering. It's as simple as that. That's cleaning money up,
Oh, that's massive. It's massive, and that's the tip of the iceberg. And that's why I said is that when you understand from those specifically two corporates, that's Temple Secretaries Limited and Company Directors Limited, they have over 260,000 shell companies. Now, you can imagine that when you steal £1 billion or $1 billion, doesn't matter, when you steal it, you can't just send a check to somebody in the British Virgin Islands of £1 billion, because it's too obvious if there was to be a proceeds of crime recovery, because you just go to the same account where the money was sent. So what they have to do is fragment it. And when they fragment it, they have to do it so small that the FSA or the Serious Fraud Office would not even pay the slightest attention. Many companies go bust with a couple £100,000 in debt, and that's normal, because the FSA and the Serious Fraud Office won't bother with that, because it's not £1 million or not £3 million.
No.
And so the people that orchestrate these industrial size scams are very clever people, because they are complicit auditors, accountants, lawyers, and bankers, and they are the dregs of humanity. And that's why I try to get out what I do get out. And I've been threatened by the very highest, including Sir Samuel Essen Jonah and a guy called Peter Landau.
And they're serious people, these people. I mean, you said to me earlier on, because of your own background in the military, that you've got friends and some of them would be experienced men. They worked in war zones, and I've no doubt, Gordon, but there is a but to that. These guys couldn't give a shit really about.
Oh, neither could I. Neither could I. I mean, I've got to say, I've been shot at a few times in my life. It doesn't particularly worry me. if it's my time, it's my time. All I have is a duty of care to get this out to as many people as I can, to ensure that maybe my children and their children and everybody's grandchildren will have a better life, that these people are accountable. And those people that hold public service office, whether it be in the House of Lords or MPs or even the Prime Minister, they are accountable. They are public servants. And if there's any skullduggery that they've been involved with, then people like myself have a duty of care to stand up and start shouting about it, which is what I'm doing.
Which is what you're doing. Now, Simon was on to say, can Gordon explain the David Cameron connection with missing nuclear missiles and how Margaret Thatcher knew about all of that? Do you want to kind of explain what it is he's talking about there?
Yeah. Part of the address to the people at Trafalgar Square,
which is on YouTube, by the way. Look for Gordon Bowden on YouTube and you'll see that. Go on, Gordon.
Yeah. For the last 5 years, I've been in constant contact with a whistleblower to me. And he is a superb, intelligent, retired civil engineer. That man was involved with Rolls-Royce Nuclear. Very intelligent man. He's a patent designer, and he was requested by a certain John Arnold Breedenkamp to participate in the loading of 20-foot ISO containers, which were used in the arms trade. He was taken to Pelland Harbour, near just north of Pretoria, which I know about, which was the South African nuclear weapons development facility, where people like Dr. David Kelly would go and visit. And the trips were reciprocated when Wouter Basson was invited to the UK. Now, Wouter Basson has got a better name in South Africa, and that was Dr. Death.
Dr. Death, yeah.
Yeah, he's a nasty piece of stuff. But obviously he had friends in high places. He used to take the unfortunate black people in helicopter rides over the ocean and tell them to step out. Or he was part of that, and chemical attacks on various people. But as I said, is that when you understand that Dr. David Kelly, from what I am told, was one of the people, the poor innocent people, who formed the sort of transportation side of these particular nuclear weapons. And what happened was, back in 1989, David Cameron, who was a young conservative, was asked to go to Pelland Harbour with, I'm told, with Sir Ken Warren and Dr. David Kelly. And part of the visit, which was funded by a front company of Arms Corps in the United Kingdom, and what they were going to do was, it was a preemptive trip where they were going to organize the removal of 9 completed 20 kiloton battlefield-ready gravity nuclear weapons, bombs. And they were to be decommissioned. However, there were a load of Tory grandees, I am told, who saw this as a way of making a pupload of money. And what they did was they organized that they would purchase these weapons, 3 of the 9, and then they would onward sell them to the British government. Now, from what I am told, and I am told this by my whistleblower, Dr. David Kelly went to Pelland Harbour, and they had manufactured specific weapons cradles, and these 9 weapons were loaded one at a time, attached to parallel rails, which were bolted to the floor pans of 20-foot ISO containers. They were then railed to Durban Harbour, where cash exchanged for 3 of those weapons.
Massive amounts of cash now. If it was cash that was exchanged, it would have been huge amounts. So
Huge
we're talking massive suitcases full of money.
Huge amounts,
right?
I am told. And what then happened was that 6 were loaded for onward shipment to Chicago, where the fissile material would be removed and they would be decommissioned. And the other 3 were to be used as a retaliatory weapon for the retake of Kuwait should Saddam use chemical or bioweapons against our coalition forces.
Well, weapons that we gave him to destroy the Iranians with, of course. Well, when I say we, I mean the United States of America and us. Yeah. Such a sickening little cesspool, isn't it, really, Gordon?
Well, it is. It's very sickening if you're an ex-member of the forces or a serving member of the forces to understand the skullduggery of politicians. However, from my source, who phones me sometimes three times a day, every day, he's a lovely gentleman.
At a great risk to himself, I'm guessing, Gordon. I mean, these are serious secrets this guy has.
Well, not only secrets, he's got written communications from Tony Blair, which Tony Blair wanted back. He offered him £800,000, which my sources said told him to go and take a long walk. But he sent his mouthpieces who worked for John Arnold Breedenkamp to make the deal. And within that was a promise by Tony Blair to open up an inquiry into these 3 missing nukes.
Well,
that's why I say.
Well, that would have never happened anyway. We know that.
Well, I understand as any person does, there has to be a compromise, whether it be the security of the state and their, and those that should face criminal prosecution. However, it extended beyond that because, as we all know, most people wouldn't know, the reason we sent 2 squadrons of aged buccaneers, which I worked with, 15 and 16 Squadron in Larbrook, later on the Tornado. But they were the only aircraft that could facilitate the loading of those 3 nukes. Now, under the guise, the MOD said that they were being used as laser target designators for the Tornadoes in standoff laser-guided weapons. But as I said, I know because we would load the WE-177s, our nuclear stock, at Larbrook onto those Buccaneers, which are actually smaller weapons. They were 15 kiloton. And so I speak from experience on understanding that because I was also a trained NBC shelter marshal and guard commander for the bomb dump in Larbrook. So I do know a little bit, not everything, but I do know more than enough to be able to sort out the rubbish and the chaff from factual information. And the man that's been speaking to me for the last 5 years is a man of dignity and honor, and I trust him. And if his information is false, then not only has he lied to me, but he's lied to a load of people. But I've seen letters from very senior politicians who have written to him, and I hold those as security for myself. They are held on duplicate on portable hard drives by other people for my protection, if you understand.
A number of people have asked, Gordon, sorry to interrupt you, a number of people have asked me, I asked you this earlier today, I asked you this before we came on air, I'll ask you again.
Yes.
Why hasn't somebody murdered that whistleblower? Because, as far as whistleblowers go, this guy would be Elvis Presley with the information he has. How is he still walking around?
Well, he's still walking around because those letters from Tony Blair are in very safe places.
And that's what it comes down to. And I asked you this today, and you said that all your own information kind of keeps you safe because you've got friends that have different documents and different flash drives and stuff like that on them as well.
Portable hard drives. You can't. We're not on Skype video, but if I could pan round with the camera, I would show you a locker which is full. It's full of dossiers. It's a double wardrobe, and that's just one of 3. And they're all on ring-bound A4 file folders. Most of them have got 600 pages on each dossier. However,
Gordon, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. It's flown by the time. It often does when we talk about these matters. Yes. I'm not trying to deflate your balloon for a minute, but what makes you think that the BBC are going to use the information you've given them and are going to attack the government with it? Why would they do that?
I don't say they're going to attack it, but I've released into the World Wide Web tonight in preparation for our little chat. I've put into the Facebook site a document to the BBC. And within that document is a historical communication from BBC Radio Derby to me of a message, a communication to Panorama BBC. and that is a forensic trail of passing information with forensic evidence, which I took with me at the time on the 1st of the 3rd to the BBC to show the senior executive. Now, nobody wants to go to jail, and I don't say anybody in the BBC wants to go to jail, but they're under the cosh at the moment with their involvement of a senior officer being involved with HSBC Bank. And the document
That's right. It's very important to mention that, yeah.
Yes, and the document I took shows the link to my partner's fraud where the bank used was HSBC Bank. So
what we haven't had time to get into is how taxpayers' money is siphoned off to UK political parties. And that's another big talking point that we maybe could have gotten into tonight. Maybe we'll get into it again in the future, Gordon. A number of people have asked me to ask you about where you are online. So if you want to give out website details, now's the time to do it, because we are kind of rapidly running out of time. Go on.
Yeah, anybody that wants to contact me, I've got an email address. I don't mind giving it out. I will give that information freely. Say, I don't want 1 cent for what I'm doing. This is not what it's about. It's about protecting my country, which anybody that put a uniform on will. Policemen, servicemen, firemen, they're all trying to do the same job. It's just that they don't have the information which is critical for the future of our country. And so they can contact me. It's on, if I give it in phonetics, Romeo, Alpha, Foxtrot, Bravo, Oscar, Whiskey, Delta, Echo, November at yahoo.co.uk. And I'll pass the same forensic communications that I've sent the BBC. They are accountable. One day these people will all face jail.
And you have my email address as well, so make sure you pop me a copy of that stuff, won't you?
Yeah, well, if you look on Facebook,
I know it's on there. I know you've put it up there anyway. But Gordon, it's seriously important stuff. Thanks for coming on to talk about it. I'm sure I'm glad you came on. I'm sure we'll pick this up again with you in the future. No doubt, not only myself but other alternative news people will be dropping a couple of emails to the BBC. I don't know how much good it'll do, to just gently remind them, we know that a former military man handed you documents and information, and we just want to know what you're doing with that. And I think anybody listening to the programme, email and contact the BBC, say you heard Gordon Bowden on the Richie Allen show, or you watched his YouTube videos and you want to know what the BBC is doing with that. That's the next step for you, the listener, is to chase them up. Don't let them just sit on it. Tell them you want to know what they're going to do with it. Gordon, thanks for coming on the programme. I appreciate you doing it. Enjoy the rest of your evening in Derby, and do stay in touch with us and come back again.
Well, thanks, Richie, and thanks to all your listeners as well, because it is important at the end of the day. It's not just for us, it's for everybody.
Spot on, mate. Gordon Bowden, thank you very much indeed. Gordon on the line to us there from Derby.